patrons and subscribers, welcome back to the new show. I'm Random Rob. I hope everybody's having a good week and enjoying drier weather than we've had here in Virginia for the past few days. I've been trying to paint my porch recently, but we keep getting day after day of rain lately. So, today's episode. I've been covering so many darker themed films lately, I thought I would do something lighthearted today and talk about Nathan Joran's 1964 H.G. Wells adaptation, First Men in the Moon. Wells published First Men in the Moon in 1901. It's the story of an out-of-work playwright named Bedford, who becomes involved in the plans of his eccentric neighbor, Dr. Cavor, who has invented a gravity-defying material called cavorite, which he intends to promote by making an expedition to the moon. Bedford and Cavor discover that the moon is inhabited by an ancient subterranean insect race, whom Cavor calls the Selenites. After some misadventures, Cavor opts to stay on the moon to teach the Selenites English and learn more about their society and technology, and Bedford returns to Earth. In the final chapter of the book, Bedford is approached by a friend who is working on an experimental radio based on the designs of Tesla, who intercepts radio communications from Cavor from the moon, during which Cavor indicates that the Selenites have discovered the warlike nature of mankind and seem very troubled by it, at which point the radio communications go silent. It's worth noting that First Men in the Moon was a book that C.S. Lewis remarked to a friend of his that this is one of the best novels of its genre, and had a profound effect on Lewis's book Out of the Silent Planet, the first novel in his space trilogy. Also interesting to note, Jules Verne hated the book because he thought the anti-gravity device was fantastic and silly and thought that Wells should have used available technology. So let's get into how this book was adapted. I'm going to tell you 3 things you need to know about the 1964 film. Number 1, the lost film and updating for the 1960s. The 1964 film is actually the second time First Men in the Moon was adapted. A 50-minute version was produced in 1919 by the British film company Gaumont that took liberties with the original narrative to fit the short running time, and unfortunately seems to be a film that has been lost forever. This is one of the only remaining stills available from the film, showing a human astronaut apparently talking to the Grand Lunar of the Selenites. The evolution of the 64 film begins with Nigel Neal, who you may remember from my video about Quatermass and the Pit. One thing I did not know about Nigel Neal when I was researching this video was that he was an uncredited screenwriter on Halloween 3. So Neal was talking to Ray Harryhausen. Harryhausen had just finished working on Jason and the Argonauts, which was a really big hit in 1963. And Harryhausen had wanted to adapt some Wells novels, specifically Food of the Gods. But Neal talked him out of it and got him interested in doing First Men in the Moon, to the irritation of Harryhausen's friend, collaborator, and producer, Charles Schneer. If you've never heard of Charles Schneer, he's the man who produced every Ray Harryhausen picture except for 1 Million Years BC. The reason Schneer did not want to touch First Men in the Moon was because it was a Victorian period piece, very risky for budgetary reasons. Nonetheless, Neal and Harryhausen kept after him, and the film was greenlit. Neal, in his typical style, turned in a very dour, serious adaptation. Too serious, in fact, Schneer thought. So he brought in screenwriter Jan Reed to lighten up the material add a little more comedy, and late in the process of reworking the script would add in the character of Kate Callender as a love interest for Arnold Bedford. Bedford and Dr. Caver would be played by Edward Judd and veteran character actor Lionel Jeffries, who were both good friends off-screen and who had some natural comedic instincts when working together. Aside from adding in more comedy and a love interest, Nigel Neal had also come up with a wrapper story that would involve UN astronauts in the present day finding evidence of the 1899 lunar expedition. After the discovery, a small group of UN scientists tracked down Arnold Bedford, who is living in an elder care facility, and Bedford relates the story of their lunar adventure, at the same time issuing a warning that the astronauts must not enter the subterranean lunar city, where they will almost certainly be killed by the Selenites. But ironically, in a story turn taken from War of the Worlds, it turns out that the Selenites have been wiped out by bacteria brought into their city by Dr. Caver, who had a cold. Number 2, Ray Harryhausen and the visual design. It says a lot about Ray Harryhausen that all the films that he did special effects for are still to this day invariably thought of as Ray Harryhausen movies. We forget the producers and directors, but we always remember his distinctively designed creatures. He's really one of the only special effects men who gets this accolade. We don't think of The Empire Strikes Back or Jurassic Park as Phil Tippett movies. Sadly, though, First Men in the Moon is not a film that's often remembered as one of Harryhausen's best. And this probably has to do with the fact that he had some technical problems working on the film due to it being shot in Panavision. As far as I understand it, most of the photographic processes he came up with were based around a narrower screen width, and that it was more troublesome to line up timing and camera movements in the wider format. So if you're a particularly sharp-eyed Ray Harryhausen creature fan, you may notice that some of the stop-motion work in First Men in the Moon is a little more juddery. Movements are not quite as smooth as some of his other work. Nevertheless, his designs for the selenite creatures and their crystalline machinery still have a wonderful visual aesthetic and can even be seen having a clear impact on later science fiction films. Notice, for example, how the retracting doors of this lunar dome resemble the Lunar Shuttle landing bay from 2001. Notice how these selenite worker drones bear an uncanny resemblance to the space jockey from Alien, or how this crystal computer panel has a strong similarity to the crystalline technology on the planet Krypton from Superman the movie. Even on a difficult shoot like First Men in the Moon, Harryhausen was always innovating, always a few years ahead of the genre. Number 3, the pros and cons of Whimsy. First Men in the Moon, when it was released, the reviews were fair to middling. The most common complaints being that it takes too long to get going, and that the film had too much comedy in it for its own good. In hindsight, I don't think the comedy is a bad thing, though. A more serious adaptation was done for the BBC in 2010, which stuck much more closely to the events and characters in the book. Despite being done with an obvious love of the material, it's even lesser well remembered than the 1964 film, in part due to issues with pacing and having digital effects that haven't aged especially better than the 1964 film. While I think the comedy didn't serve the film well at the time, I think it definitely makes it more watchable now. And because it's done in such a lighthearted way, it's easier to forgive the more janky visual elements, and frankly gives the film a breezy quality that's unique for a Wells adaptation. So, would I recommend First Man in the Moon from 1964? Yes, provided that you're not looking for hardcore science fiction. To me, First Man in the Moon is a comfort food film. It's light, it's charming, a perfect film to watch with kids or on a rainy day. I especially love Lionel Jeffries in this movie as Dr. Caver. He always seems to be on the verge of a panic attack in every scene, while at the same time still espousing the kind of enlightened socialist viewpoint that Wells was known for. And one other bit of trivia before I sign off, there's an uncredited appearance by Albert Finney in this movie at around 43 minutes and 30 seconds. He plays a bailiff from the town who drops off a notice of repossession to Kate at Cherry Cottage. The story was that Finney had showed up to tour the set that day, just randomly, and that the actor who was supposed to play the bailiff didn't show up, and the director, Nathan Duran, asked him, "Hey, can you play this part?" And Finney said, "Okay." He's such a chameleon of an actor, I had to watch the scene a couple of times through just to be sure, like, yeah, that's him, that's Albert Finney. So, have you seen First Man in the Moon? What'd you think of it? Did you see the BBC version in 2010? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like what you heard, hit the like button and subscribe, and consider becoming a patron of the new show. I could use your help. Alright, this is Random Rob, signing off. Till next time, be excellent and take care. The new show is made possible by generous support from viewers like Tony, Arnow, Skipnick, Christopher, Marion, Eric, and B. Thank you so much for your support.